read across the screen here on the first trading day of October. Carol, a lot of that has to do with two big developments. Of course, a port strike here in the U.S. and military conflict in the Middle East.
Yeah, absolutely. Trying to assess all of this domestically, geopolitically. Having said that, certainly the Middle East, we did see market reaction, whether it was in the energy markets or that safe haven trade. We backed off a little bit off of it, but we did see also the VIX spike a bit, hitting 20 at one point. And you do wonder, Tim, certainly investors thinking more volatility to come in this market.
Yeah, I do think it's notable that that stocks aren't actually lower right now. I mean, we were down as much as 1.4% on the S&P 500 earlier in the session. Maybe investors, I know it sounds kind of crass to say, but breathing a sigh of relief that the escalation coming from Iran wasn't more, Scarlett.
Well, it's still early days, of course. This was just the first day where there was an attack. But I should mention as well that given that investors seem to be in a bit of a wait-and-see mode, it's interesting that volume has not been off the daily average. It's only about 4% below the 20-day average. I was expecting to see a bigger drop-off, given that people maybe wanted to wait until there was more clarity from what's going on geopolitically as well as from earnings.
Yeah, absolutely here. And we should just point out here, we did have some big moves in the commodity space. Of course, oil prices did spike, as did precious metals, including gold and silver, as people went into those safe havens. We also saw a lot of activity in grain prices, which could be affected by any sort of prolonged conflict there between Iran and Israel. Meanwhile, we get the equity market close here in the United States with red across the screen, though the good news is we are far from the lows of the day. A Dow Jones Industrial Average down 173 points or 0.4%. An S&P 500 that's going to close just above 5,700, down 54 points or 0.9%. A NASDAQ Composite down about 1.5%. And the Russell 2000 also moving lower here on the day by about the same percentage, about 33 points lower or 1.5%.
All right, so on this first trading day in the fourth quarter, let's take a little bit of a deeper dive into the S&P 500, those large caps, guys. As Romaine has been talking about, I mean, most names, you did see that risk-off trade. So 340 names in the S&P 500 to the downside, Scarlett, 162 to the upside, one unchanged.
Yeah, and to go along with all that red you see there among the major indexes, you look at the breakdown of the sectors within the S&P 500, and the worst performers so far in the fourth quarter, of course it is day one of the fourth quarter, are tech stocks, losing 2.7%. REITs off by 2/3 of 1%. Financials losing about half of 1%. In terms of gainers, energy stocks, clearly the outperformers here, up 2.25%, 21 out of 22 names gaining. Utilities, another safe haven kind of trade, up 0.8 of 1%. And communication services higher by 0.4 of 1%.
All right, a lot of red in that map. All right, let's get to some of the individual gainers. I'm going to start with, you guys have been talking about some of the sectors that were certainly impacted as a result of what was going on in the Middle East. Well, the military names, the defense contractors, among them Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin, among the top gainers in the S&P 500. So let's just pull it up. Northrop Grumman. Sorry, up about 3%, but it was as high as 5% in today's session, but still with a gain, as we said, of 3%. Moving on over to Lockheed Martin, that one also finishing off its highs of the day, but a gain of about 3.6%. And we did see some higher volume. Scarlett was talking a little bit more about volume, but we did see some higher volume on some of these names. All right, also APA Corporation. This one up almost 5% in today's trade. Total Energies and APA approved a $10.5 billion project to develop the first oil discoveries off of Suriname with a view to pumping crude as soon as 2028. So we saw investors moving into that one. Of course, watching the energy trade in general out of the Middle East news today. And then Paychex. This was a top gainer in both the S&P 500 NASDAQ 100, this one up almost 5%, up the most in about 1.5 years. The payroll and HR services company reported first quarter results that beat expectations and gave an outlook. And speaking of earnings, we've got some crossing the Bloomberg.
Well, actually, a change in management. This over at LPL Financial, only about a $17 billion market cap. This is the advisory and brokerage firm saying that they have terminated their CEO, Dan Arnold, and I'm just going to quote this, for violating LPL's commitment to a respectful workplace. He has also resigned from the board, and right now they have appointed Rich Steinmeier as interim CEO. We should point out that those shares, Tim, halted here in after-hours trading.
All right, thanks for that update, Romaine. I do want to get to the decliners that I had my eye on today. I do want to start with shares of Apple falling close to 3% today. Romaine, did you get that new iPhone yet?
Well, no, I have not, but okay. I did check it as I check it every 10 minutes here.
Okay.
It has actually gotten through customs, so it is actually here on terra firma in the good old U.S.
Okay,
of A.
tune in
So
tomorrow.
good, so
Tune in
good.
tomorrow.
Now,
The
it's all,
next
now
update.
UPS, the ball's in your court. Get this thing to
For
me.
the next update of
Yeah.
when and where is Romaine's
Are you going to do an unboxing video?
Can you imagine
I'm
how
too old for
boring?
that.
No
Oh my
offense.
God, that would be so
The iPhone
incredible.
16. Wow. Okay.
Please do it.
Hey, actually, this is a good point. It kind of speaks to why Apple shares were lower today. Analysts and investors are continuing to track just how high demand is for the company's latest iPhone. Many are hoping will re-accelerate growth. Barclays wrote, though, that Apple may just have cut roughly 3 million units at a key semi-component in iPhones for the December quarter, which it confirmed would be the earliest build cut in recent history, if they were to confirm that. Excuse me. Separately, our own Mark Gurman reporting that Apple is preparing to announce a new low-end phone. It's the iPhone SE. Coming next year alongside upgraded iPads. It's codenamed V59. It'll become its new entry-level model, according to people familiar.
Why does it need
the
to be
matter.
codenamed? You just told me what it is.
Everything needs a code. Names are cool. I think that's what it is. You got to have a code name.
What's your code name?
It's a secret.
Clark Kent.
It's a secret.
Totally, Clark Kent.
All right, let's move on to CVS. Shares falling a little more
See how
than
he dodged that?
50%.
See how he
You've had
dodged
that
that, Carol?
before.
I've
You-
gotten
So
that
you know
before.
he's really Clark Kent.
Halloween.
He's had that before. You can tell.
Our Bloomberg News team is reporting that shares of CVS news reporting that the company is conducting a strategic review of options, including a possible breakup, according to a person familiar with the matter. CVS faces headwinds not just from its drugstore chain, but also its Aetna Health insurance arm. The company also said separately today that it plans to cut roughly 2,900 jobs to reduce costs. Shares falling down 2.13%. Also keep an eye on HPQ down 3% today. That's HP Inc. A warning from Citi about a cautious view on PCs due to the impact of a weakened macro environment. Scarlett.
All right, let's get to some breaking news. We've got earnings out of Cal-Maine, the poultry producer, so they sell eggs, reporting earnings per share for the fiscal first quarter of $3.06. That misses the average analyst estimate by 30 cents. Net sales for the period was $785.9 million. That is higher than the consensus estimate, although we don't have a lot of estimates to really cull a median number from. But nevertheless, the consensus estimate is just over $700 million. So revenue outperforms expectations and EPS misses. The stock up right now almost 6% in after-hours trade.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting, too, in the statement, they also talk about their exposure to Hurricane Helene. Of course, they have a lot of operations down in that region here, so they're not able to provide too much of a guidance here going forward, primarily based on that. Meanwhile, let's take a quick look at where U.S. Treasury yields ended the day, slightly lower on the day, part of that flight to safety. Of course, the bid that came in was largely centered around the heart, the benchmark, the 10-year yield there, down about 5 basis points, 3 to 4 basis points moves along the other parts of the curve.
All right. Listen, what a day. And I'm thinking, this is just a reminder. And I kept kind of quoting as we were doing our coverage here, and I'm assuming you guys did too, of what was going on in the Middle East, is go back to December of 2023. And when we talked with investors and market strategists about some of the things that were on their radar, one of the things that was a key concern was geopolitical risk.
Yeah.
And so what we are is in this environment, right, where we have to assess where does this go next? How much longer does it go on? We were just talking with our Nick Wadhams, who covers national security here in the United States, saying that, these are both issues, whether it's Ukraine, Russia, and also the Middle East, that will carry over into the next presidency. So this is something that's going to linger for some time.
Yeah, I
think
in terms of timing, it does come just over a month away from the presidential election here in the U.S. And what ends up happening would certainly depend, at least when it comes to U.S. involvement in these regions around the world, would be entirely dependent on who ends up winning the White House, Scarlett, in just over a month.
Let's not forget, too, that we're days away from the October 7th anniversary as well. And there's going to be lots of protests here in the U.S. and around the world. And for a lot of people, a very emotionally trying time, too, as we look to see what else happens.
We get to this idea, though, too. You mentioned foreign policy, and we were speaking with Stephen Cook over at the Council of Foreign Relations, kind of talking about the lack of influence, at least in his view, that the U.S. has over Netanyahu and that administration. The idea that, Israel has made it clear what its plans are. It's made it clear that it's going to defend its borders and to keep its folks safe here. And I think that's where a lot of the concern is with investors right now, is that in order for them to carry through on that, this might have to be ratcheted up, and no one really knows where this is going to go right now.
Right. What does that escalation mean
Yeah.
maybe for the U.S. in terms of military presence or boots on the ground? So certainly something that we'll continue to track. All right, guys, that's a wrap. Our cross-platform coverage, radio, TV, YouTube, Bloomberg Originals. We call it The Closing Bell. We will see you again, same time, same place tomorrow.